Welcome everyone to the International Mentoring Community Mentoring Lounge. It's great to be here with you. And my name is Stephen. Doug's with me. We'll do a little bit more formal introduction. But I just wanted to acknowledge our topic today is looking at this overwhelm, underwhelm effects on an extraordinary mentoring arrangement connection. We've had some conversations around this notion of overwhelm, and the word underwhelm then came into our conversation. And we sort of said, well, hang on a minute, is there effects when we are finding ourselves involved with overwhelm? And so I decided to say, hey, Doug, this is the topic for today. Let's take a look at it. And then I remembered that there is this underwhelm concept as well. So we'll see how this sort of all unfolds. Are you hearing a lot of clicking, a lot of beeping, Doug?
No.
Oh, okay. Maybe there's something going on my end. Beep, beep. Anyway, so let's just keep going. We'll have fun no matter what. Okay. So that's where we're going to go with today's topic. And we have 8 really important points after we do some of the base definitions and taking a look at it, giving you some examples. We have 8 ways in which to deal with this overwhelm and underwhelm, and from the 2 perspectives, the one from the mentor to the mentee and mentee to the mentor. So we'll be able to explore quite a bit here today. But we're going to get started because, as we usually do, we bring a question out of Quora. Doug is the one who is always digging around in Quora, finds questions, and questions are sent to him about mentoring. And he has one today that he's going to share with us and his response. And just to remind you that the question and the response will be in the show more notes underneath the video if you wanted to do some base follow-up. So, Doug, you want to just go over your question from Quora and your response?
I sure can. The question that was posed is, what is the best way to find a mentor for my business? And my response was, there are a number of ways that you can search for and find a mentor. You need to determine first, however, what it is that you need. You also have to come to terms with the fact that your mentor or mentors do not need your industry-specific knowledge. It is a nice to have, not a need to have. And in my particular case, I am mentoring a number of people in different industries or sectors, and we're moving forward with little or no difficulty. So what I suggest is that you check with your local business community to see if there are any mentoring programs where they match mentors and mentees. You can also look online for various organizations that provide business mentoring. And one other thing is you can also check with mentoring software solution providers, as they may have a database of mentors, people that have signed up with their program, and you can look there as well.
Also, I think one could sort of just check into one's network and just ask others hey, is there a great mentor out there that I could interact with? Some of the people who've come to me and asked me to mentor hasn't come through any formal. It was just, oh, you met and oh, okay. I heard really great things about you. I thought I would reach out to you. Oh, that's wonderful, because it just means that obviously your network's working for you. Yeah. So that's great as well. So yeah, thank you for that. And again, we will get another core question that will come out next time we're on or in the mentoring lounge. So that's wonderful. But we're going to take a look at this topic of overwhelm and underwhelm effects on the extraordinary mentoring arrangement connection. Now, the word extraordinary is in here for a reason. And Doug, can you just chat a little bit about the continuum from good to extraordinary when it applies to mentoring?
Yeah, I certainly can. We can. When I looked at that hierarchy of mentoring, for lack of a better choice of words, I broke it down into sort of 3 different steps or 3 categories. There was a good mentor, a great mentor, and an extraordinary mentor. And that's where, we make the reference back to the extraordinary mentoring arrangement would actually can in fact come from that extraordinary mentor working with somebody to build up and creating that deeper, richer mentoring experience.
Yeah, and some people we've seen have added things like memorable and remarkable in between great and extraordinary. We're just using it as a way to be able to say is that as you gain practice, as you gain the concepts about what mentoring is about and serving as a mentor, you do, in a sense, go through this good to extraordinary continuum, however many words you want to put in there. And that's why we just wanted to acknowledge that today. So there is this sense of when there's a mentoring arrangement that's put together, mentor mentee, and they agree to arrange to meet and to connect, to have a relationship. There are times when you might find this overwhelm and underwhelm effects might slip in. I'm also going to propose is that there are maybe times when it might be purposeful to be able to take a look at the use of overwhelm and underwhelm. But being who I am, I tend to go dig into the roots of the words to find out where they come from. I went to whelm and then to overwhelm, then to underwhelm. So I'm going to share a little bit here, but we're going to share some examples, and Doug has from his own practice. He'll share some things here for us as well. Now, the interesting thing is that the word whelm is actually a verb. We don't tend to use it very much in today's world, but it sort of was floating around in the 14th century. And I'm using the word floating around is because it usually meant to cover, overturn, submerge. And if you think about it in terms of, boats on water and to whelm, to be whelmed with water maybe coming over the side of the boat. And that's where it sort of came from. Now, some people have used whelm as a sort of midpoint between overwhelm and underwhelm. I'm not sure that I would quite go that way, but I just thought that I would just point it out because there were some references online to that. I think this overwhelm, underwhelm, when I share with you a little bit more about the roots, you'll understand why I don't think whelm is the middle of it, okay? Or the calm section of it. So when we look at the word overwhelm, it actually came out in terms of that 14th century as well, because what they were talking about was when the wave of the boat overwhelmed it, sort of a bigger wave came and just took that boat and in a sense turned it over, capsized it, if you think of it from that perspective. And that's sort of the overturning of the boat. And where it did was it started to come into the conversation around this notion of giving too much information or giving too much of something to someone. Could be information, and or it could be to bury someone under a lot of stuff. I think of those cartoons where the paper's piling on the desk. You feel like you're getting buried underneath it. In terms of this notion of being submerged or washed over, it could be this, from this information is that, whoa, hang on a minute, you just gave me way too much stuff there, maybe an answer to a question. And that's where it's sort of from an overwhelm, as you might sort of see it and feel it within the mentoring arrangement. But I'd just like to add a couple of things, and then let's take a look at some examples of overwhelm from your sense, Doug, and I'll give one from my sense as well. But overwhelm also has this this sense, the effects of sometimes it has intense emotions associated with it. Is that something might be happening? We'll use words like prompt trigger, and all of a sudden this washing over, this whoosh as I call it, of extreme or intense emotion. And it's maybe a little bit difficult to manage at that point in time. And I can give an example of that with a mentee that I had. But what also this effect of this overwhelm can do is it can really influence your thinking and this notion of acting rationally. We sometimes know when the emotions overtake us, intense emotions, they wash over us, this overwhelm, it can actually, it can sort of take us sideways a little bit, if I use that language, and you're going to have to deal with it. And therefore, things like distress and life experiences is what can bring it on. So I'm just going to give an example then, maybe from your deeper practice, Doug, you can share one around overwhelm as well. There is a time that I was interacting with someone and they were asking me some questions. And I sometimes, whoa, that answer can take like 5 minutes, 7 minutes, because I get so caught up in the answer and I'm giving the steps. And then I could sort of, I sort of woke up to the fact that the person sitting across from me sort of had that look of, like a deer in the headlights, that sort of, oh, hang on a minute. What was that? You just gave me 5 steps. I don't know if I can remember number one, right? And it reminded me is that I washed over, I submerged this person in way too much information. And what I learned from that was, as a mentor, is hang on a minute. Maybe I could talk about the first step, and I might say to the person, hey, listen, there's 5 steps I want to go over. Let's do the first one. Let's make sure you get that. Let's do the second one, the third one, the fourth one, the fifth one. So it just reminded me. And I guess, guess what, Doug? About 2 days ago, I did it again. and I went, now I know why we're doing the topic of overwhelm and the mentoring arrangement today on Wednesday on the show, the Mentoring Lounge. So I felt that kind of humorous. So do you have an example of an overwhelm situation you want to share?
I was just thinking that everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
One of the, yes, I do. And one of the things that, as I was listening to your conversation, one of the things that jumped out at me was that the mentor needs to be when actually both of them are becoming overwhelmed with some of the issues that they're dealing with, how they're approaching it, and all of those factors, is that as a mentor you have to be so careful. You have to be very mindful of bias, because you can decide that because all this stuff is coming on top, being thrown, overwhelming you, you may decide, well, so the next time we get together, that's what's going to happen. So I'm going to put these things into place when they may not be the right things to put into practice, into place. And so for me, like when I take a look at that, one of the things that I have done with my practice is to be very mindful of bias and how easily one can be influenced. Like I think of, in particular, in the mental health space that I'm working right now, is I can have a preconceived notion of what the outcome is going to be, and that's not fair to that person, because I'm going to try and guide them to that outcome because that's what I think is the right place to go. And it's not. I need to be able to listen and hear, be non-judgmental, and be able to, together we need to be able to unwrap what it is that the issue is and be able to deal with it, no matter how much other stuff is kind of coming on top of us.
Yeah. And sometimes a mentee may enter in and everything's great. And then all of a sudden there may be this overwhelm of intense feelings that are there. That could be because of something that's being talked about, or maybe they thought they dealt with it. And there's lots of things that can happen. I've had my own whoosh of feelings because of talking about something as well. And I have to deal with that in there, because we have to remember mentoring is this sort of two-way, trusted personal, professional alliance, collaborative conversation. And therefore, there's whooshes. It's a great technical mentoring term, I know. There are these whooshes that can happen to the mentor as well. And we have to take that into consideration. There's a gentleman by the named Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. You might know him from writing the book Flow. And what I'm bringing it up from an overwhelm point of view is that sometimes you might find where the challenge that you're interacting with may be more than the competence that you have, your abilities to deal with it. And that's why, from a mentor with a mentee, is pay attention to that, is that you don't place a challenge beyond the competence of the mentee. Okay. And if the mentee happens to bring a challenge to you, all right, and you don't know the answer to it, or you don't have the competence to answer it, is know enough to be able to say, you know what, this is something we're going to both have to look into a little bit more and get into that two-way conversation. So I just wanted to bring this sense of flow story to it because I think it's also important. Anything else you want to add to that, Doug, to the notion of overwhelm?
Nope.
Okay. Underwhelm. Now, this is why I said that the notion of whelm, between overwhelm and underwhelm. Did you know, Doug, and because I never shared with you, but did you know that actually the word underwhelm only came into our vernacular, into our language in the 1950s? I, I, I had to go, is that true? And I went and looked for a couple of sources, and yes. And what it was someone, I didn't get back to who brought it in, okay, or what complete context. I know if I dug around, I'd find a bit more. But what they were sharing with through the links that I found was underwhelm was brought forward from a perspective of humor, okay? And I went, oh, that's kind of interesting, because it was about not giving enough, right? Or failing to make a positive impact, or their disappointment. There's you can sort of see the feelings that are floating there, to fail to interest, stimulate, right? These kind of things too. And then the person sort of has a little bit of indifference and restlessness, and they're off doing something else. And this notion of, well, that was kind of an underwhelming presentation, and right? That was where it came from. And I thought, hey, that's really fascinating, right? And so I thought, hey, I'm going to add a little bit to this. It's when maybe a mentor or a mentee, all right, in terms of their interacting, answer a question, they use some fluffy wuffy stuff. A hairball appears. Well, yeah, I don't know what's going to be, right? Or you baffle with BS. These kind of things. I'm attempting to be a little humorous here, but I think there is something to be said for, what is, you didn't hit the mark here. Something is missing, right? And this is where I'd like to offer something slightly different here about the underwhelm. I know for sure for myself, as I'll slip into overwhelm. I get that. Okay. It's just because I just so enjoy when I mentor and I get a chance to chat about some of the things I do. But it was probably a couple of weeks ago. Again, this is before the topic, but I went back into my reflecting, and I actually used an underwhelming response to see what the mentee would do. And I just made it up in the moment, and I just, okay, well, I'm not sure I got a really complete good answer for that, but here's an answer. And it was kind of underwhelming. You can hear it in my language, just underwhelming. And I said, well, does that help you? I said, oh yeah, yep, that was good, great. And I went, hang on a minute, I purposely underwhelmed, right? The person said this was great. I think we need to have a chat here. Okay, because there's a disconnect here. All right. And I went, oh, this is kind of interesting. Now, why I chose to use an underwhelming response to the question, I don't know. It was just sort of something slipped in and off I went, and I did it. I don't tend to think myself, and most people I talk to when they're mentoring, as though they underwhelm. I maybe you have something you want to share there, Doug, in terms of an underwhelming example, or just elaborate it on a little bit more.
Well, part of it comes from my perspective, comes from the value that I bring to the relationship, and how, if I'm listening and hearing what my mentee is saying, that they may not feel as though this isn't what I signed up for, or this isn't what I thought it was going to be. And as a result, they're not fully engaged in the relationship. And so as a result of that, you have a tendency to not fully commit to what it is that is taking place. And for sake of argument, you actually appear to be underwhelmed or undercommitted to the relationship. And so I find that what you need to be able to do is, display, demonstrate the excitement, the enthusiasm that you have for this mentoring relationship, and that you have the presence in that you're here, excuse me, here and now. You're in the moment, in order to be able to help that mentee feel as though that they're getting full value for your time together.
Yeah. So sometimes the mentee can come with the response that's a little underwhelming as well, and I think we're bringing that to the surface here. Yeah. So I think what we do is we have to pay attention to this overwhelm, underwhelm, and it's sort of what's happening. Well, maybe I gave too much, maybe I didn't give enough. Okay, right? It's what's happening here. Take a look at this, and the effects that it might have on what's taking place between you, the mentor, and the mentee. And therefore, we want to come up with these sort of 8 ways to think about dealing with it. But just before I leave this, I want to go back to Csikszentmihalyi's work on flow. And an underwhelm might be, from a mentee's point of view, is that their competence is more than the challenge that the mentor might be giving. And they are sitting there going, okay, can't you wrap this up a little bit? Maybe you don't know enough about me, and the challenge that you're giving, the way we're talking about this, isn't it's my competence. I'm way past this. So again, just looking at it from a sense of flow as well. Okay. So these 8 ways to counter overwhelm and underwhelm, all right, fits both for the mentor and the mentee. And the first one that I'm going to bring to the foreground, and Doug and I are forever talking about this one, which is the asking of questions. Okay. Now, one of the great questions when you're interacting with someone is, if you're wanting to know a little bit more, is you can ask a question like, why? Why is that important to you? Or why is that going where you are? But sometimes I find if I'm using why a little bit too much, it sort of feels like I'm poking. And I have to pay attention to that. And I'll use phrases like, okay, just walk me through what's going on, or run us both through that so we understand what's taking place, or can we just fly over that so I get a better sense of what's taking place? I'll use some kind of phrasing like that to keep moving things along, so it doesn't feel so much like I'm poking. All right. And I picked this up from, I did a lot of work with appreciative inquiry. And appreciative inquiry is having a conversation with someone and then unearthing the responses to the why question. And you're sort of asking why about 5 times. But in that sense, it's okay, because the person knows the purpose of that inquiry. But when you're mentoring a mentee, if you keep poking, it's not the best thing to do. So I just bring that to the surface. And I also, just a couple of other things, the kind of questions that you can ask, might be fast and slow. Okay, maybe fast to get to the point really quickly, or slow, asking questions around it to get to where you need to go. Or I think of it like there's what I call the portrait deep questions. If you take a piece of paper in the portrait, okay, you're sort of going deep into the person. But if you turn it 90 degrees, you get landscape. And I think of that as sort of like the surface, and you're asking questions to get at the surface and the landscape of what's going on. Another way to look at it is, just asking questions that are general and then maybe going specific, coming out general, sort of seeing what's happening. And again, you can use, well, let's go at this and look for the simplicity of this, or let's go look for the complexity of this. And obviously there's combinations of all four of those, right? It's just asking those kind of questions. Thoughts?
Yeah, the one that's kind of jumped out for me right now is it's kind of in relation to, well, number one, it's in relation to the work that I'm doing in the mental health space, but it's also tied a little bit to the course that I'm going through, that they talk about asking, questions, but it's all about asking the right questions and at the right time. And one of the questions that they had that they said was taboo not to use when you're dealing with somebody from a mental health perspective is, what is your issue today? And that's coming at this with a preconceived notion that this person that you're meeting with has got an issue, instead of, so what are we going to talk about today? So it's more open, it's more calming, it's such that they feel comfortable in wanting to be able to respond to that question, where if you want to back them in a corner, then you ask the question, what is your issue today? And, that can trigger some behaviors that, you may be trying to deal with and you've just gone and triggered them.
Yeah. And then that's bringing up the intense emotions. Then there's a sense of overwhelm, and off to what it is we've shared already.
Yeah.
I think another one that of the 8 would be is to ask for an example. And there are examples that you might say, okay, well, they're actually experience-based. Can I get an example of something that's happening to you that's real for you? Or I might give a thought experiment to the mentee, sorry, and say, this is hypothetical, a thought experiment. What would happen if you found yourself here? Because maybe what I'm trying to do is get to find out, did I overwhelm or not, or are they underwhelmed? And I'm just going to use an example in the conversation to get things unearthed, right? Because they may have been submerged, so I'm going to unearth them, okay? Or bring them to the surface if I go back to the water story. So I think a third one that we can take a look at is, and I think this is a really, really important, is if you find yourself you as a mentor, or you see the mentee in an overwhelmed situation, instead of continuing to move forward into it, it might be helpful to take a break. You might say, hey, why don't we take a break? Let's go get a refill of our coffee, if you're in a coffee shop or wherever it might be. Hey, why don't we just go for a quick walk, take a look at a tree outside, or whatever it might be, just to get a break in there so that the person can reflect on the situation, okay? So one of the things that I do in my practice is I make sure that the mentee understands about what's reflection in and reflection on. And why I'm talking about the break and reflection on is just to stand back and look at what's taking place and finding out, from a causal, casual perspective here, did something cause this, or is it just casually it came up, the whoosh came up, or was the whoosh there because it was brought there because of the words, the triggers, the prompts, or did it just sort of appear? So I bring that to the foreground as well as sort of a third way in which to counter the overwhelm and underwhelm. Anything coming up for you around the last couple that I've just mentioned?
Well, certainly on the, taking a break, I kind of akin that to the concept of crucial conversations, and having, a conversation and recognizing that now, because we're overwhelmed with everything we've been talking about, that emotions are starting to crest and we need to take that break. And so it's a matter of let's take a break and let's get back together again in an hour or so when we feel as though we can create that safe place for that conversation to take place.
Yeah, for sure. And the next one that I want to bring up sort of brings 1, 2, and 3 together in some ways, okay? And what it's to do with is to really understand what's the noise and what's the news, all right? Because there's lots of noise around us nowadays, okay? And there are people who say the news is the noise. I get that as well, okay? It's sort of happening all around us. But to know when it truly is noise and doesn't really contribute, right? Or what you found yourself doing is listening to a lot of the noise, and I'll use bad gossip as an example. And you're a mentee in the workplace and you're hearing all this, and then you're bringing that noise into the mentoring arrangement, and it sort of can feel a little bit overwhelming for you and bring up the intense feeling. But then when you start talking about it, right, the mentor goes, okay, I got to sort this out, right? I got to meet them where they are, right? So what's the news in that, and pull it out rather than spending time in the bad gossip aspect of this, right? But the flip side of that is, right, if the news that you're finding is so superficial that it's really is not going to be helped, that's a bit underwhelming. In other words, you haven't done some research, right? You got to go find the news, the insights, the ideas that you want to bring forward, okay? And that goes for both the mentor and the mentee, all right? Usually the mentor understands that, but the mentee sometimes need to be guided, is bring something to our arrangement, to our conversation that's going to help with where we both want to go, and especially to help you, dear mentee, okay? Anything there?
Just 2 words: fact, fiction.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you writing a fiction book or a faction book?
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Good point. Good point. Well, let's look at the next one, which is when and where matters. Okay. The time in which you're having your conversation, the location of where the conversation, the technology you're using, when and where matters. And this, from an overwhelm, underwhelm point of view, is that a person may hold back in the coffee shop, whereas if they're on a walk with you, they might bring more out. Okay. Sometimes when we use technology, we can sort of hide the fact of what's going on. Like right now, you wouldn't be able to know that I'm tapping my foot, right? Because maybe there's something going on. Or sometimes I'll do the twiddling of my thumbs, right? Or I'm moving. You wouldn't notice it, but I'm doing it at the moment. Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So sometimes technology can hide a little bit of that body language that may indicate the overwhelm, underwhelm. And we need to pay attention to that as well. Thoughts there?
No, I agree that part of that can also be tied to being present and in the moment as well. So, from remembering when and where, and that part of that is also lived experience, being able to take lived experience that's relevant to be able to bring forward into the particular conversation that's taking place.
For sure, for sure. Well, because of Doug's work in the mental health area and the conversations we've had, he's always reminded me of something, and it's what I'll call the upset for the setup. Upset, set up. And to be able to understand is that if you are finding yourself dealing with an upset, then how are you going to set it up so that it doesn't escalate the upset? That's an important element here as well. And that's where there's 3 things that I learned from my time of being involved in the outdoors and a lot of programming and instructing wilderness remote first aid. There is 3 things that I remembered. I said the first thing was that I have to have a preparation approach. I had to be prepared for what was happening. Don't go in going, no, okay, whatever happens today, happens today. That can be an approach, but at the same time, just come at it with a little bit more preparation than that, dear mentors. Okay. And for those of you who are mentees, hey, listen, come prepared to engage and be available. Okay. Another one would be, I call it the prevention backpack. Okay. And it's to think about, what it is that I'm carrying with me, about how am I going to prevent the overwhelm, underwhelm? How am I going to contribute so they don't escalate or de-escalate or whatever might happen? Is how can I approach this with a little bit of prevention? Okay. And then the last of the three here is the notion of practice continuance. I've got to continue to develop my practice. So if I find an upset, how to set it up, because one upset from person A, even though I'm going to meet an upset from person B, the setup could be completely different in how you are going to deal with it. So I would just encourage people to really cultivate their minding, their conscious thinking as they're coming into the arrangement, to further the connection, to think about like a preparation approach, prevention backpack, right, and a practice continuance. So those are ones, I certainly draw from my time dealing with situations in the out of doors where you had to have these to be able to deal with what's taking place. And I just draw them into the mentoring arrangement. Anything you want to add there?
No, that was good.
Okay. So number 7 is, hey, in your arrangement, in your conversation, in the establishing of your contract, have a conversation about what's too much and what's too little. Where are you? Or every once in a while, just check in and say, are we covering enough, or do we cover way too much? Just ask, right? Just ask that question. Clarify from consistency. And it's amazing what can unfold for you as well. Now, I'm drawing it out a little bit different to number 1, just simply because it may be you're into it and you want to get that clarification, and you notice something and you just want to ask. Number 8, this one is kind of interesting. And it's to know the connection between routine and ritual. When you're in your arrangement, there are times where you might have this notion of a routine. It's a set of actions that you just regularly follow. You arrive, you say, hi, how's it going? All right, so what do we want to talk about today? Right? And into it you go. And you might find that you get into a little bit of a routine. All right. And sometimes this routine is sort of like, becomes like a rut. And I think a rut is like a grave with the ends kicked out. That's what I think of a rut. And so the routine that you fall into can actually underwhelm, okay, or it may overwhelm. If, to Doug's point about the question, what we're going to talk about today, do you have an issue or something like that you want to look at? The way in which you just tend to go in without really taking into consideration everything could find yourself in this notion of a routine. So the ritual I offer to people is it's action arising from the sense of a celebration. Maybe what you could do is have a little bit of a different way of entering in each time. And the routine flavor of it might be, well, why don't we talk about something that happened that's linked to the reasons that we're getting together for mentoring? So I'll use an example. I'm doing a little bit of work in the area of safety at the moment. So one of the rituals we use is, well, what's something that, from a safety perspective, that you saw happen? And they talk about it, and okay, what did you learn? And we can all benefit from it. So sometimes what the mentor-mentee can do is, well, let's have a little ritual that speaks about, well, what happened between the time we last met about taking what we've talked about and put it into action, or I want to share the story about why I want to ask this question, right? It's rather than routine, rut, grave, ends kicked out, just doing the same fixed thing. I'm talking about, well, let's get a little bit variable here, and it's useful to understand that distinction between routine and ritual as it deals with this overwhelm and underwhelm storyline. So I thought I'd have that one in as well because it's a little bit different than probably a lot of people would think about, but it links to this notion of the safety, all right, the of the arrangement of the connection between the mentor and the mentee. Anything you want to add to anything to what we just shared?
No, that was good.
Okay.
No, that was good.
Well, then, in a way of closing off, there is something I want to share with you. And then Doug, like all videos, gets the chance to have the last word of something he thinks is important. But there's 5 things around this overwhelm and underwhelm linked to something that I, from a preparation approach, this notion of prevention backpack, this notion of practice continuous. Here's 5 things that I'll always have with me. And the first thing is, I'm always going to make sure I define the terms and concepts of what we're going to talk about. Even if we've been together for a while and some new term or some new concept comes in, don't make any kind of assumptions here. Just clarify what we know about those terms and concepts. And then for both the mentor and the mentee to agree, okay, on what those terms and concepts mean, because those terms and concepts are going to be used to create some kind of a map, right? This is the lay of the land. This is what we're going to look at. This sort of gives us some boundaries that we're going to work with, because from that, then you're going to apply those terms and concepts in the plan, the actions and the outcomes that you're going to be looking at from that map and the plan that you're going to use. And so often what happens, the work that I do, a lot of times I get paid to help people understand the terms and concepts they're playing with so that we can figure out this map and plan that they want to work with. And they could have done that without me, but hey, sometimes that's what I get paid for.
Yeah.
Okay. And the 5th part of that story is to review formatively and evaluate continuously. So the review to look, to view it in how you're forming it, to continually, in a sense, look at it as it's happening, and then to evaluate it continuously. There's times where you put a very distinctive evaluation in to find out how things are going for both the mentor and the mentee. So define the terms and concepts, agree on the terms and concepts, use the terms and concepts to make the map, all right? Then apply the terms and concepts in the to manage the plan. Make sure that you review formatively and evaluate continuously. If you do that, that will, I believe, okay, help you deal with overwhelm and underwhelm situations, because you can get at it from this preparation approach, prevention backpack, the things you carry with you, and this practice continuance. So that's what I thought I wanted to add. So if you want to add anything to that or take us out, I leave it to you, Doug. And when we're done, we're done. How's that sound?
Yeah, that sounds good. The one thing, I guess, as an example of overwhelm, is we can draw our viewers, our listeners back to, we provided you with a lot of material today. And for some of you, that may have been somewhat overwhelming. And so we encourage you to take the time to go back and listen to the video one more time, or you can do it 2 or 3 more times if you wish, but to go back and listen to that and be able to take a little bit deeper look at what it is that we were providing today.
Wonderful. Okay. So with that, everyone, take care, and we will see you next week at 10 a.m. Mountain Time here on the YouTube channels of Wealth Learning TV, the International Mentoring Community, and we're also doing this on the Facebook group. So that'd be great. And the other thing that we would ask of you today is please subscribe. That'd be wonderful. So with that, take care.
Take care.